I welcome you all to the module 4, and this module 4 is about trait perspective, and this is the second lecture of this module, and overall it is lecture number 8. So, today's lecture is about more specific trait theories, and today we will be talking about Cattell's 16 personality factors and Eysenck's 3 super traits. So, before we talk about today's lecture, let me give you a brief recap of the last lecture. So, in the last lecture we kind of introduced the basic idea behind traits, how do we define traits, and we discussed the various characteristics of traits, how do you define a trait and what are the major parameters associated with it. We also talked about Gordon Allport's trait psychology, who was kind of founding father of trait psychology, and we discussed some of the basic ideas proposed by him, and then we talked about how to identify traits. There are three major approaches to identify traits. These are lexical approach, statistical approach, and the last one is theoretical approach. And at the end we discussed, in the context of trait, person situation debate. What determines human behavior more strongly, whether it is the personality trait or the situation is more important. So, we discussed the various aspects of this debate. So, today we will be talking about these two particular theories which are related to trait psychology. So, we will start with Cattell's theory. So, Raymond Cattell, he provided one of the very important trait theory which is still used and talked about in the literature on psychology. So, his basically idea was, he defined personality mostly using the term trait as being personality. He kind of defined it as being the characteristics of the individual that allow prediction of how they will behave in a given situation. So, he identified range of traits, the diverse kind of traits that determines human personality, and also he talked about 16 personality traits according to him, which are the foundation of human personality. We will be talking about that. So, Cattell defined traits as relatively permanent reaction tendencies that are the basic structural unit of the personality, which means same thing whatever we have discussed in the last lecture. So, trait basically means the same thing. It is a relatively permanent or enduring patterns of behavior of human beings, by which we can kind of identify certain characteristics or defining features of a person, which also distinguishes one person from another person. Now, Cattell's scientific training, he was very rigorously trained in scientific training and statistical method, which led him to apply very empirical ways of empirical methods and more statistical method like factor analysis to identify this basic structure of personality using traits. So, his approach of identifying trait was statistical approach that we have discussed in the last lecture, where he used a specific statistical technique called factor analysis to identify significant number of traits that can describe human personality. So, he used statistical method. So, he observed that many personality traits are similar and argued that existing trait list could be reduced to smaller number of fundamental traits. When he is talking about existing number of traits, means where if you remember, Gordon Allport, from the lexical approach, from the English dictionary, he kind of summarized about 4500 traits. So, he started with that and then he reduced it further. So, we will see how he did that. So, in that context, he is saying the existing number of trait lists could be reduced to smaller number of fundamental traits, and how he did that, we will talk about that. So, Cattell's work initiated the search for structure of personality using factor analysis. So, his approach of identifying trait was statistical approach. Obviously, he also his foundation was lexical approach, whatever was discovered till now, and then he used statistical approach. So, factor analysis, we have discussed a little bit about that in the last lecture. It basically involves compiling frequently used personality description from the data. They collect different description of personality from large number of sample, and then they use statistical technique to summarize the patterns using. So, factor analysis gives you cluster of items which are similar, which clubs together in terms of certain similarity, and those similar cluster are called as a trait. So, this is how it is done, and I think we have discussed it also in the last lecture. For example, some trait like determined, persistent, productive, goal directed behavior can cluster together and form one factor. So, this could be all part of one factor which is called as an achievement orientation or achievement orientation of a person. So, his achievement orientation of any individual could be determined using many sub traits. So, overall the major structure trait is achievement orientation, and it could have many important sub traits which are determined, persistent, productive, goal oriented, all actually come together as a cluster in the factor analysis. So, this is how it is done. So, factor analysis will show what are the similar kind of factors which come together, and they can form one superordinate or main major structure, major factor, which is called as a trait. So, this was his approach. Now, he also did a lot of classification of traits, different categories of traits. We will see some of the categories of traits. So, he said trait is not just one type of trait, there can be diverse varieties or kind of traits. So, one way he kind of classified traits are common traits and unique traits. So, common traits are basically those possessed by almost everyone to some degree. So, these are commonly available among the population of human beings. So, everybody will have some part of a trait, somebody may have higher on this trait, somebody may be low on it, but it is mostly some aspect of it will be available in the or can be seen or expressed in the population. So, that is why these are called as a common traits. So, these are possessed by everyone to some degree. On the other hand, unique traits are distinguishing features of an individual. So, if an individual has an unique trait, that means basically it is very unique to that person, it is not shared with other individuals, very unique specific kind of traits which distinguishes this person from other individuals. So, unique traits mostly distinguishes individuals, common traits are kind of commonly available, but the degrees may differ. So, this is just a tabular form of distinguishing common traits and unique traits. So, it is possessed by everyone to some degree, but this is unique traits are unique to individuals. Examples of common traits are like intelligence, extroversion. So, people have this trait. So, here we need to understand that Cattell also intelligence was also kind of introduced under personality. So, if you remember the first lecture where we defined the characteristics of a personality, intelligence is not strictly comes under personality traits, but in a broad sense Cattell included intelligence under personality also. So, things like intelligence, extroversions, most of the people have these traits, but in the different degrees. But unique traits could be something like unique interest of a person. Somebody is interested in playing baseball, or let us say somebody is interested in martial arts. So, this is a very specific thing of a person. Most of the kind of interest thing, whatever things the person is interested in specific aspects, those actually determines unique traits. So, common traits are mostly universal due to the similarity of hereditary potential and social pressures. So, these are universal in a sense because commonly as a population collectively we have similar, there is some kind of common gene pool as well as similar social pressure we all face. So, some common traits develops because these are required to survive in the social world. So, that is why these are universal. At least in a culture specific sense, a group of people within the culture will have a lot of similar traits, because there is a common social pressure, common social environment where we all develop, and also there is a common gene pool that also tends to express those traits. Unique traits are not universal, these are more very specific to individuals. Common traits, people differ in the extent to which they possess this trait. Obviously, everybody will not have the same amount of those traits. People differ because of their unique interest and attitudes. So, unique traits mostly come from their interest and attitudinal differences. So, these are some of the differences between common traits and unique traits. Cattell also distinguished between ability traits, temperament traits and dynamic traits. So, some traits are called ability traits, some traits are also come under temperamental traits, and some traits are called as dynamic traits. So, here are the differences between these three types of traits. Ability traits determines how efficiently we work towards a goal. So, it is mostly about your abilities towards working in certain aspect. So, how efficiently you are able to work towards a goal. So, that efficiency level determines your ability traits. So, ability traits will include mostly lot of these cognitive traits, like somebody may have a mathematical ability, creative ability, practical ability, verbal abilities, lot of these intelligence related ideas or aspects. All these cognitive traits comes under ability traits, because they help you to reach goals, to efficiently do your work. So, mostly these are in terms of solving problems and doing works. In that context, ability traits are expressed. Temperamental traits, on the other hand, these are like styles of reaction, emotional tone of behavior. So, people have typical emotional tendencies in terms of reacting to stimuli in the environment. So, that determines their temperamental traits. What is the emotional tone of the person, a general tone, how that person react to different situations, mostly in the sense of emotional tone. So, that determines temperamental traits. It typically determines how we act and react to a situation. It may include things like how assertive one is, how easygoing one is, what is the level of irritability of a person, whether the person gets irritated very easily or some person are more calm and so on. So, those emotional tone determines what kind of temperamental traits they have. So, this will come under temperamental traits. The dynamic traits, on the other hand, are mostly represent driving force of behavior. So, these are more dynamic. So, there is a force behind it. So, these traits are determines the dynamism of a person, and they define motivation, interest, ambitions of the person. So, whatever motivations you have, whatever interest you have, whatever ambitions you have, this will come under dynamic traits, because there is a force that propels you to do something, or so that sense of dynamism, that sense of energy, sense of all these things are associated with the dynamic traits. So, traits could also be distinguished in these ways: ability, temperamental, and dynamic traits. Another way Cattell differentiated traits are based on surface traits and source traits. So, as the name suggests, surface trait is more of a superficial or expressed, outside expressed traits. Source trait is the source from which the surface trait kind of emerges. So, surface traits are characteristics that correlate with one another, but do not consist in a single factor. So, we will kind of understand it little bit better when we this is basically composed of several behavioral elements. For example, neuroticism as a trait is composed of anxiety, indecision, irrational fear. Now these are expression. Now, neuroticism, you do not see neuroticism as such in terms of expression. So, what you see in the expression of neuroticism is that people will have lot of anxiety, people with neurotic trait will be not able to decide, indecision, there is a characteristic associated with people that they are not able to decide lot of things because of the anxiety, and people also have irrational fear. Now, these are surface level traits which get expressed in actual behavior, but neuroticism, when we say that it is a source trait, because this is the source trait from which these are expressed. So, the foundational source level, deeper level trait is that neuroticism, but surface level it is expressed in terms of anxiety, indecision, irrational fear, and so on. So, source trait are more fundamental traits like extroversion, neuroticism, these are like source traits, and they have different expressions in the behavior which may have multiple expression of a one trait. Surface traits are less stable and less permanent. So, these are not very permanent. So, they are kind of keeps changing also in terms of expression. So, even people with neuroticism may show the different levels of anxiety, not all the time similar level of anxiety. So, they are like more or less very kind of unstable, less permanent. So, these are more of an expression in a particular situation. Source trait are more permanent and stable. So, somebody who is neuroticism, it does not change. So, your inner structure of that neurotic structure will remain relatively permanent, years after years you will remain a neurotic person, or neuroticism characteristics will be there, but your expression may not be very permanent all the time. So, your sense of anxiety, obviously it will be there in lot of situations, but it is less stable but source state itself is much more stable because it is of a relatively permanent characteristics. So, source states are more important in terms of describing personality. Surface traits are important because this is the expression also, but these are comparatively less important in terms of describing personality. Now, this source trait can also be classified based on their origin, from where this source trait starts. Based on that, there can be constitutional traits and there can be environmental mold traits. So, constitutional traits are basically more of a biological nature which arises from the biology of the body, but not necessarily innate or genetic. It could be genetic also, but it is not necessarily that constitutional traits, but their origin is from the biological aspects of the body itself. Environmental mold traits, on the other hand, they come from social and the physical environmental influences. So, these traits are, we acquire them from the outside environment. Constitutional traits, they emerge from the biological aspects like your body chemistry and so on, neurochemistry and so on. It can come from the genetics also. So, examples like behavior from alcohol and drugs use. So, let us say somebody takes drugs and alcohol for a long time. So, there will be some biological changes in the body itself, which will impact their behavior, like the person may become careless, they may talk too much, nonsense talk and so on, slurred speech and so on. Now, this changes in behavior which may become relatively permanent if people take drugs and alcohol for a long time. So, it is originating from the biological changes because of taking these substances, So, that can come as a constitutional trait. On the other hand, let us say behavior that is influenced by upbringing, let us say what kind of environment you are born and brought up. People in the lower class, upper class, middle class, you see there is subtle differences in their behavior and so on. It is simply because of the environment in which they are born and brought up. So, there will be some differences in how they outlook of the world and how they behave and so on. It is completely taken from the environment itself. There is nothing biological about it. So, those are called as an environment mold traits. So, these are this is how they are different. Now, because source trait is most important in terms of Cattell's theory, because he is focusing on source trait, because he said source traits are the most important traits which describe personality. So, he said in order to understand personality or describe personality, we need to understand source traits. So, his theory is called 16 factors theory. Basically, he is kind of categorized 16 source traits which can define human personality. So, these are he recognized these 16 personality factors using a questionnaire he developed and using factor analysis as a tool from the statistics. So, his journey of identifying these 16 source traits comes from this Allport's 4500 words for traits that he did from his research, from the lexical approach that, as we have discussed in the last lecture, where Allport came to 4500 words from the English dictionary, which are trait like description of human personality. So, he started from there. So, then he, using team of raters and experts, he removed synonyms, reducing them further to 171 traits. So, he could find out that out of 4500, 171 trait makes more sense and they are more unique traits, and lot of them are again synonyms kinds of words. So, rater then assessed individuals on these traits, further narrowing the list to 36 surface traits. So, out of 171 traits, again many raters, when they assessed them on these traits, he could narrow it down to the 36 surface traits, means more of an expression like traits. These are not source traits. So, from 171 traits list of traits, he could again narrow it down to 36 surface traits, means these are more like what is expressed in the behavior itself. So, additional research and review of psychiatric literature, he again identified 10 more surface traits. So, this 36 already he narrowed down from the Allport's list, plus he added 10 more, which lead to 46 surface traits, 10 more from the literature and psychiatric literature and so on. And he said these are sufficient to describe individual differences in personality. Okay. So, these are surface traits, remember these are not source traits. So, beginning with the 46 surface traits, Cattell employed statistical method to see the patterns among these 46 surface traits and to cluster them into further less number of source traits. Because these are surface traits, they can be clubbed together to form more latent structures or latent factors which are called as a source traits. So, he aimed to factor analyze measures of all these 46 traits collected from large number of sample. So, the process we have discussed in the last lecture. Through the factor analysis of extensive data sets, he identified 16 major source traits out of this one. So, from 46 surface traits using factor analysis, he came down to the 16 major source traits. So, this source trait will have expression in terms of surface traits, which altogether forms 46 traits. So, he said these 16 major traits represent the basic structure of human personality. So, according to him, we can describe everything about human personality using these 16 source traits. Additionally, Cattell ranked these traits based on their importance in predicting individual behavior. He also ranked them, some are more important, some are less important according to the list that we will be discussing. So, the initial ones are more important and as we go down the list they are less important in terms of describing personality. So, this is kind of the journey of Cattell, how he started with 4500 traits and then finally he came to the 16 source traits. Now, each of the 16 source traits are ranked, represent a continuum. So, one end, there will be two ends of each trait, one will be low score, one will be high score, extremely low and extremely low score, there will be true end of any traits, So, people can be very low score in one trait, people who score high on a trait, they will be in another end. Cattell emphasized that almost all source traits have both positive and negative aspects. So, every trait will have positive and negative aspects, means if you take both the extreme, one will be positive trait, one will be negative trait of the same trait, one will be expressed negatively and one will be expressed positively in the same continuum. So, let us see what are these traits. So, you see this is the list of traits that Cattell talked about, 16 traits. So, these are the list of traits. So, there are more in the next slide. So, I will just read out few of these things and obviously the detail will be given in the handouts in the portal itself. So, the first trait is outgoing reserved. So, basically these are two extreme ends, one end will be outgoing people, another end will be reserved kind of people. So, he used some technical terms also sometimes to explain this one, affectothymia and schizothymia. It is more of a technical term, but it is more of related to outgoing and reserve as a trait. So, these are two extreme end of the trait. So, endpoints are one endpoint is outgoing, another endpoint people will be reserved. So, same trait, people will be completely different from one another in the extreme ends. Low score, people who score low on this trait, factor A, they will be reserved, aloof, detached, more like introvert people. High people who score high on this will be outgoing, warm hearted, easygoing, more like an extrovert individual. So, it is same as introvert extrovert dimension. So, this is one factor. Next is intelligence, as I said, he also included intelligence in the personality factor also. So, high and low. So, people in the high, so endpoint will be high intelligent and low intelligent will be another endpoint. So, basically it is self explanatory, low and high intelligence. The third factor is stable emotional, one is stable, another is emotional. Okay. It is more related to like neuroticism that we discussed. So, it is also connected to ego strength. Okay. People who has high ego strength, ego not in the sense of pride and so thing, ego strength is ability to kind of connect with the reality and deal with things. So, in that sense people who has a high ego strength are more stable emotionally in as compared to people who has low ego strength. So, this is term that is used in a different context. So, extreme ends will be stable emotional, low ego strength, easily upset, people who score low on this one, People who score high is high ego strength. People are generally calm and able to manage their emotions much better ways. Another is assertive, humble. So, basically it is also called dominant submissive category of a trait. So, at the one end somebody will be very dominant, assertive, other end people will be humble and less assertive. So, low score will be submissive, obedient, unsure, high score will have dominant, assertive kind of individuals. So, like this there will be another factor called happy go lucky, sober kind of thing, is also called surgency, desurgency category. So, one end is happy go lucky and another is sober. So, low score is serious, sober, depressed. High score will be happy go lucky, enthusiastic, more of happy attitude and so on. So, there are other traits like conscientiousness, expedient, which is related to superego. Superego is more related to your sense of morality. So, people in these endpoints are conscientious and expedient in the other end. So, people who score low on this will be expedient, low in superego means people will be less in the aspects of moral aspects. So, they will try to do things irrespective of how morally it impacts other and so on. So, if something needs to be done, they will do anyway whether it is morally right or wrong, you know. So, that is the term expedient basically means. Conscientious people are very morally strong and they will think lot of about whether it is right and wrong and those kind of things. High in superego in that context. So, like this, you know, there are other factors, venturesome, shy, opposite is like, you know, people who are shy in one extreme, low score people. So, they will be timid, shy, aloof, restrained, and venturesome people will be bold, adventurous and so on. There is another trait called tender minded, tough minded. So, again the tough minded, self reliant will be low score people here. High score people will be tender minded and sensitive. So, some traits are like opposite in sense. Some trait the low score will be negative, some trait low score may be positive, you know, depending on how it is worded and so on. So, there is other traits related to suspicious trusting. Again trusting, understanding will be low score people, high score people will be suspicious, jealous. Imaginative, practical. Imaginative, practical people with low score here are practical, down to earth. High score people are imaginative, absent minded and so on. Shrewd, forthright. Low score will be very forthright, naive kind of individuals. High score will be shrewd and worldly, you know, more complicated, more, you know, shrewd kind of individuals who know the tricks of the world and so on. Then the another one is apprehensive, placid, which is also called as guilt proneness, assurance. So, people low score in this are self assured, secure individual. People high in that score are apprehensive, insecure kind of individuals. So, like this these are 16 traits he talked about, source trait, and they express in diverse ways. He also, these are not so we have about 12 traits we have discussed. Last 4 are according to Cattell, these are called Q factors. These are not very good predictor of behaviors, but these are still important. So, he separated them, these are called Q factors. So, Q1 is related to experimenting conservative individual. So, at the one end people will be very experimenting and another end people will be very conservative. So, people in the low score here are very conservative, they dislike changes, they want very structured, whatever is going on that should go on, they do not want any change, very conservative kind of individual. People high score on this were very radical experimenting kind of individuals, they are more open to new experiences, they are quite fine with changes and so on. Here it is self sufficiency, group tight. So, one end is self sufficiency, another is group tight. So, people low score here are group dependent, they very much whenever they do anything in group they are very dependent on the group. People high score on this are very self sufficient, independent kind of individuals. Q3 is related to controlled and casual. So, here people low score are very controlled, lax and impulse, uncontrolled, sorry, people with low score will be very uncontrolled and impulsive kind of individual. People score high here is very controlled and compulsive. The last one is tense, relaxed. Again people low score here are more relaxed, tranquil, composed individuals. People high score here are tense, driven, fretful. So, these are like 16 factors he said, these are source traits, and according to him these are like good enough number of traits to describe human personalities. Everything, every individual differences, every characteristics can come under this 16 according to Cattell. So, now this theory has also been criticized in certain aspects. We will not go into too much of details of criticism, but some of the major thing we will talk about. One thing people criticize about this theory is that it is very complex. 16 is again looks like too many, and in terms of how to use it in the practical terms, it becomes little bit complex, because a lot of these 16 traits and kind of identifying them and using them in the practical setup, sometimes it becomes very complex and so on. So, this is one kind of criticism. Another is that a lot of people could not replicate these 16 factors from the other researches. So, that is also a questionable thing. So, critics of many Cattell's factor analytical approach argued that despite his claim of objectivity, a lot of subjectivity was involved in naming those traits. So, that is where a lot of differences comes with other researchers, where they could not actually find out exactly like those 16 traits again. In decision made during the data collection, test selection and factor labeling, these are susceptible to personnel biases. So, a lot of his own ideas he used them in terms of labeling them and describing them. So, that could also be one reason that people could not replicate them again. So, this subjectivity may explain difficulties in replicating Cattell's findings and confirming this 16 source trait. So, these are some of the criticism, but despite this, still this theory has a lot of impact, although it is not the most significant theory in today's time, but it has impacted a lot in terms of understanding and refining further in terms of trait theories. That will be talking about some other theories in today's lecture as well as in the next lecture. Now, the next theory that we will be talking here is Eysenck's 3 superfactor theory. So, here is a person who said we do not need 16 factors. He said 3 factors are good enough. So, let us see what is his ideas. Hence, Eysenck spent most of his career focusing on measurement of personality. He was completely obsessed with personality. He agreed with Cattell, Raymond Cattell, that personality consists of traits derived from factor analysis. So, he agreed in the methodology part of it that we should use factor analysis to derive personality traits or understand traits, but he criticized the method of potential subjectivity and difficulty in replicating finding, which is a major criticism of Cattell's theory, that lot of subjectivity get involved in leveling traits and those kind of things. That is why there is an issue in replicating those 16 traits in future researches. So, Eysenck also he used factor analysis, which he also used as a foundational method, but he also relied on personality test and experimental studies that included broad range of variables to supplement his research. So, he used other sources of data, not just factor analysis and so on, other methods also he used. So, Eysenck endorsed the conventional view that personality traits are inherited from parents and families. So, one of the idea that is very dominant in his theory is that personality traits has a very strong biological component. There lot of these personality traits very significantly, lot of it comes from the parental influences, like the genetic influences. Over 50 years ago, he emphasized the significance of biological aspects or genetic inheritance in shaping personality, and lot of this his ideas actually evidence was found in the recent researches, as we discussed the biopsychological perspective, where we could see a lot of personality traits actually has a very strong genetic influences. We have already discussed the evidences in the 3rd module. So, Eysenck pointed out that physiological differences between individuals often lead to behavioral differences, reinforcing his claim that the biology plays very crucial role. So, people differ in their physiological reaction pattern. Bodily there is a difference between people in terms of how they react, what is the physiological arousal pattern and so on. And these differences actually creates lot of psychological differences in terms of reaction patterns. So, initially he was met with lot of skepticism, but his views were later supported by a lot of many researchers, especially the biological part of it. So, he said human personality can be described using 3 super traits, He said these 3 are good enough super traits, which are kind of source trait if you talk about Cattell's terminology. So, he said there are 3 broad dimensions of personality. So, these are psychoticism, extroversion and neuroticism. He said these 3 are super traits. Most of the other things are expression of these 3. So, along with these 3 super factors known collectively as Eysenck's PEN model. Why it is called as a PEN model? So, P is for psychoticism, E is for extroversion, N is for neuroticism. So, in short it is also called as a PEN model. He also identified more specific traits which called narrow traits associated with each of these factors. So, these are like super traits, more like source trait of Cattell, and they obviously have many narrow traits associated with each of them in terms of how they express. So, we will see what is their sub traits and so on. These narrow traits provide detailed understanding of the behaviors and characteristics that define them. So, that is the idea. He says there are 3 super traits and other things are expression of them only. So, let us start with the first one, extroversion. So, extroversion is about, so some people are outgoing, some people are, they prefer being themselves with themselves. So, that dimension of extroversion, one can have high score and low score. So, low scores are basically people who are introvert. So, extroversion may be expressed using many sub traits, So, extroversion has many characteristics which may be expressed in terms of, let us say, sensation seeking. Some people are more oriented towards sensation seeking, they need always some stimulation in life. They always want go somewhere, party somewhere, do something. So, there is a lot more sensation seeking kind of traits are there, which is associated with extroversion. So, people who are extrovert, they seek more sensations in life, they are more sociable, they are more lively, carefree, dominant, active, assertive, surgent, venturesome. So, these are some of the sub traits which all come together and form extroversion as a trait. So, again he kind of found this sub trait using factor analysis as a method. So, these are some of the direct quotation by the Eysenck himself in one of his books, that how he defined extrovert people. So, these are typical extrovert is sociable, like parties, has many friends, needs to have people to talk to, and does not like reading or studying by himself or herself. He craves excitement, takes chances, often sticks to his neck out, acts on the spur of the moment, and is generally an impulsive individual. He is carefree, easygoing, optimistic, and likes to laugh and be merry. Altogether, his feelings are not kept under tight control, and he is not always a reliable person. So, this is some of his observations. This is how he defined. These are exact word of Eysenck. In contrast, he said typical introvert are quiet, retiring sort of person, introspective, fond of books rather than people. He does not like excitement, takes matters of everyday life with proper seriousness, tends to plan ahead, looks before he leaps, and distrusts the impulse of the moment. He keeps his feeling, kind of opposite to what is extrovert people are. So, these are different types of individuals. So, there is no judgment here. It does not mean one is better than other or like that. These are like different types of individual, both have their own problems and own advantages. So, Eysenck explored the biological and genetic differences between extrovert and introvert. So, he said that biologically these two types of individuals are biologically different in terms of physiological reaction patterns. So, he discovered that extroverts have lower base level of cortisol arousal compared to introverts. So, cortical arousal means brain cortex of the brain. So, arousal, people get very easily aroused physiologically. So, you get very easily disturbed or busily kind of get disturbed, or there is a physiological reaction pattern is very fast. So, people with extroverts have lower level of physiological arousal. So, they need more stimulation in life to get that level of arousal. On the other hand, introverts, their level of arousal is very easily they get aroused, and That is why they don't need too much of extra excitement or sensation seeking in life, because these biological differences make them. Because extrovert needs more stimulation to kind of get excited and so on. On the other hand, introverts, their physiological arousal is already high, so they don't seek out more and more. So consequently, extrovert seeks more excitement and stimulation to raise their level of arousal. Introverts are already, their level is high, little bit of it and they kind of get much more excited, and so kind of physiologically reaction pattern is much faster in introverts as compared to extroverts. Conversely, introverts avoid such stimulation because their cortical arousal levels are already high. So this leads introverts to react more strongly to sensory inputs, showing greater sensitivity to lower stimuli and having lower level of threshold than extroverts. So according to Eysenck, there can be some basic biological differences in terms of reaction patterns among these two types of individuals. People who score high on extrovert on Eysenck personality inventory have been found to experience more pleasant emotions and be happier than those with low score. It is simply because of the social context, people who are very outgoing, more social, more friends and those kind of, so you are more likely to find more happy moments and so on. So that could be one of the reasons for this. The next comes neuroticism. So the neuroticism is more about emotional stability. So again, it has many subtraits. It is related to anxiousness, tense, little bit of maybe associated with depression. Irrational fears could be there, shyness could be there, guilt feeling, moodiness, low self-esteem, more emotional reaction. So these are all related to high score on neuroticism, people who score high on this. So Eysenck suggested that neuroticism is primarily inherited. Again, he found mostly explained using biological differences, mostly result of genetics. Obviously, there is a learning aspects to it, environmental influence to it, but he said genetics is more important. Individuals high in neuroticism exhibit greater activity in brain areas. Again, people high on neuroticism who are very anxious all the time, worrying a lot. So these such people's, their brain areas controlling sympathetic branch of autonomic nervous system. Basically, it means there is a part, our nervous system has different parts. One part is called autonomic nervous system, which functions automatically. For example, the nervous system that is responsible for heartbeat, responsible for temperature of the body or sweating and so on, we do not control them, automatically it happens according to the situation. So you are not controlling heartbeat, so it is happening, it is done by the autonomic nervous system. So whenever so that is called as a sympathetic branch of autonomic nervous system, deals with a lot of these functions where whenever there is an emergency or threat, the body reacts in a very strong way. So those are done by sympathetic branch of the autonomic nervous system. So people with high neuroticism, their activation of sympathetic branch is naturally higher. So most of the time they are emotionally much more stronger in terms of reaction. So in neurotics, this system overreacts even in the mild stress. So even if there is a very small stress, they will react very strongly, because of that physiological arousal system is very strong already. So leading to chronic hypersensitivity and heightened emotional response to minor situations. So that is why too much of worry and emotional instability could be accounted to this biological system, according to Eysenck. So Eysenck argued that these biological reactivity differences are innate, and some people are mostly, a lot of it is actually genetically programmed and so on. The third one is called psychoticism, which is again more of a controversial part in his theory, which was not very much well received by other people. So psychoticism is mostly related to people of characteristics related to aggression, impulsive, unempathetic, cold, creativity, egocentric, tough-mindedness, impersonal, antisocial. So people with psychotic trait or people high on this trait will exhibit all these traits. So mostly people are very tough-minded. Some of these such people could go into antisocial behaviors like crime and so on. They are very unempathetic. They don't kind of sensitivity is less and so on. So So, these are some of the characteristics related to psychoticism. So, according to Eysenck, these people may be cruel and inhuman in some time, lacking feelings and empathy, and altogether insensitive. He has a liking for odd and unusual things and a disregard for danger. He likes to make fools of other people and upset them. So, it is a kind of very negative trait, which people also kind of criticize, that making as a part of normal personality trait is not a good idea, because this is a very deviant trait kind of thing. So, people who score high on this trait tend to have lower emotional well-being and face greater problems with alcohol, drug abuse, violent criminal behaviors compared to those who low score. So, basically high score on this trait increases these tendencies of behavior, which may lead to alcohol, drug abuse, violent behaviors and so on. Not necessarily everybody will be in that, but it will increase the chances of going into those kind of behaviors. Paradoxically, he found lot of such people actually who score high on this are also highly creative people. This was his finding. I am not sure how it was, how much of it was replicated later, but he said a lot of people who score high on this psychoticism are also very creative people. So, research indicates a significant genetic component. Again, he said genetic component is there for everything, but it is also shows that individuals scoring high on psychoticism often had more authoritarian and controlling parents, highlighting the potential harmful influence of childhood environment. So, there is a possibility, obviously there is a genetic influence very strong, but some parenting influences could also contribute to this trait. Men generally score higher on this traits. So, Eysenck found most of actually people who score high on psychoticism are mostly men as compared to women, leading Eysenck to suggest a link between psychoticism and male hormones. So, he said there may be some connection of male hormones with this trait, because he was looking most of the biological reasons behind it. So, final thought on Eysenck's theory. Eysenck claimed that there are three super traits: extroversion, neuroticism and psychoticism, which constitute the basic structure of personality. Cattell said 16 factors, he said 3 factors. He developed this questionnaire to measure these 3 traits, and one can check out what are the scores of these traits for themselves. Eysenck suggested a link between clinical condition of neurosis and psychosis with his scale. So, he said it is possible that lot of people who score high on neuroticism and psychoticism may develop clinical conditions or disorders, but not necessarily all the time. It may increase the chances. So, individual who score high on these scales are not necessarily clinically clinical patients, or they will be disordered patient. Normal individual may score high on this also, but they are more likely to develop these disorders. Chances are high. High score indicates a predisposition that may manifest under adverse circumstances. Whenever there is a bad circumstances in life, these tendencies may come up and one can become disordered and so on. Eysenck believed that society benefits from the diversity provided by people characterized by various aspects of this three-dimensional. So, these are like different expression of people. There are different kinds of people. An ideal society will allow individuals to utilize their traits and abilities optimally and provide opportunities to express them. And however, adaptation to the social environment varies among individuals. Some people can adapt and some people may not be able to adapt. For example, he said a person high in psychoticism is usually not looked good, but characterized by hostile and aggressive behavior. Now, it depends on that person how he channelize those traits. The same person, people with high psychoticism may become emotionally disturbed or psychologically disordered and antisocial personality and so on, and exhibit criminal behaviors and so on. On the other hand, the same person can channel these aggressive traits into socially acceptable activities like coaching college footballs, or get into sports where a lot of aggression is required like boxing and so on. So, the same trait can be expressed negatively, one can become criminal, and at the same time the same traits can be channelized positively, where you use it in a more socially acceptable way, like you can use your aggression in the sports and so on and become a good sportsman and so on. So, it all depends on the individual. So, to Eysenck, traits and dimensions are determined primarily by heredity, with research shows stronger genetic component of extroversion neuroticism, and we have already discussed all these evidences in the third module. Lot of obviously no research shows it is 100% genetic, it could be up to 60%, 70% and so on. So, there is still room for environmental influences for any trait. While he acknowledged the role of environment and social influences such as family interaction in childhood, he believed their effects are less or limited as compared to genetic. So, evidence from identical twins, all these evidences we have already discussed, which shows lot of these traits are actually has a strong biological component. Even cross cultural research from different cultures and countries also found evidences for 3 personality dimensions of Eysenck in different countries like United States, England, America, Australia, Japan and so on. This cross cultural consistency further gives shows the importance of inherited factors in personality. So, these 3 factors found quite good empirical support also. However, this theory has also been criticized for certain aspects, because no theory is perfect and every theory has their problems also. So, despite many empirical evidence, Eysenck theory has been criticized for reducing complex human behavior into few dimensions. So, his criticism is just opposite to Cattell's theory. Cattell's theory had too many factors, his theory is too little, and we know human beings are very complex, you cannot just summarize them using just 3 factors and so on. So, some people criticize because this criticism came from more recent researches where we find more optimum theories that we will be talking in the next lecture. So, based on the views of the more recent emerged trait theories, these 3 factors look more too few or too few dimensions in terms of explaining all the diverse traits of human beings, which some psychologists believes oversimplifications with rich diversity of human personalities. Critics also argue that broader and more nuanced understanding of personality is needed. This is too simplistic. So, the inclusion of psychoticism trait has been also very controversial. Critics argue that it kind of includes normal personality variation with a pathological trait which can mislead and stigmatize people, because psychoticism as a trait has a very connotation for pathological aspects, antisocial behavior. So, making it as a normal personality theory, and if somebody scores high on it, can lead to stigma and misleading understanding and so on. So, people criticize this particular trait for including, because other 2 traits are anyway they are in a part of almost all theories, neuroticism and extroversion, but this particular trait has been criticized for including finding in the normal population, which is a kind of pathological trait. So, these are some of the criticism of this theory. So, this is about these 2 trait theories which are still plays very important role in the understanding of traits. In the next lecture, we will be talking about the most accepted trait theory, which is the kind of the best empirical support, and it is whenever we talk about trait theory, we talk about that theory, which is called as the big 5 factors. We will be talking about in the next lecture. So, with this I will stop here. Thank you.